just can't. Where I'd take the conversation back to is the conspiracies that we both have run into, in Tim and I, in like, I'm telling you, when I first ran into the parapsychology conspiracy, when I first ran into
what's that?
I'll explain.
Okay, sorry.
Rupert Sheldrake, Richard Wiseman, right? Richard Wiseman, Dr. Richard Wiseman there in the UK, one of the most prominent psychologists. In Rupert's words, intentionally deceptive in undermining this idea that parapsychology could possibly be true. Well, I ran into that over and over again, to the point where I'm like, this is not accidental. This is not people who just have a different belief system that they're married to. And in particular, I ran into it again with the near-death experience science, where there was this organized effort where in sync major publications would come out. So Eben Alexander publishes a book. Harvard neurosurgeon says, I had a near-death experience. Bam, Newsweek cover. Bam, hit the BBC. All these news outlets at the same time come out and attack this guy in a particular way. It doesn't make any sense unless it's an organized effort to, I don't want to say misinform, but that is my opinion, misinform.
I don't think that's right, Alex. I really don't think that's necessarily true.
You can say it's not right, but it's my experience that I lived through, and I could give you 50 hours of interview.
I think it's more organic than that. You know, the people that I know that people defend their worldview and will skew what they see to fit in with it.
No, it isn't. Richard Wiseman is called deceptive by Rupert Sheldrake, and a few years later, he pops up and he's called deceptive by Daryl Bem. So
yeah, of course. And if you talk to Susan Blackmore or someone like that, who I don't think is a deceptive woman, she will say the people who are doing the parapsychology work are deceptive, and she will give examples of that.
You're just not right. I'll tell you my story with Susan Blackmore. I interviewed Susan Blackmore about her position on near-death experience, and she totally caved. I mean, this is public. You can go listen to the interview. And she says, you know what, the research really has passed me by. I shouldn't speak on it because I just shot down her last gasp of a dying brain and this other bullshit that they still peddle out there. So that was her conclusion. Very nice, very proper, very admirable to say, you know, I really am not as well informed as I should be, because I hammered her pretty hard on the data.
Yeah.
Later that month, she went and gave a presentation on how the near-death experience science is bunk and it doesn't hold up. But the other examples that I was trying to give you is...
But that's a clear example of what I'm saying, is that Susan has made a personal journey. When I met her at university.
Bullshit.
She was doing research into that then, but she was a parapsychologist then. She was actually looking to inform. She wanted to back up parapsychology. I was an experimental subject for her. She then made a journey to the other side, and now I don't think there's some organized conspiracy. They're like, Susan, you need to go out and tell these lies. It's like she has a predisposition to do that because of her own story. I don't think we need to look for a hand of something manipulating all of this.
This is a misunderstanding of how the game is played, as near as we can tell, because sometimes the games are exposed. The shenanigans that these operatives do, because this does happen, right? I mean,
so you think there's somebody telling Sue to go out and...
Let me finish. No, I'm saying the opposite of that.
Okay.
I'm saying that it's so much simpler than that. Everyone's running, all the rats are running through the maze. All you have to do is move the cheese over here, move the cheese over there. The rats will adapt. No one has to give Susan Blackmore her...
So there is no conspiracy?
No. I'm
saying... Okay.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the opportunity to manipulate and control the outcome of a group of scientific studies or a scientific position doesn't require a smoky back room where we give marching orders to people. All we have to do is promote people that espouse a certain idea that they develop organically, and they're the ones who get promoted. They're the ones who get the idea. And so what I was going to and I already gave you this example, and you kind of jumped all over it before I even finished it. I mean, Rupert Sheldrake is a sharp guy, right?
I love Rupert.
Biologist. And he tells the story over and over again of, like, he's doing the presentation on, for example, dogs that know when their owners are coming home. And he says, okay, here's the data. And his opponent is standing there with his arms crossed, not looking at the screen. And Richard and Rupert saying, well, here's the data. And he goes, I wouldn't believe it even if it was true. Now, this isn't a guy who from the Royal Society, right? This isn't a guy who's, again, been given directives in the smoky, dark room of how to, So it's just people just a mainstream view. It's a mainstream view that's cultivated, promoted, and further advanced. But when you have somebody like Richard Wiseman who pops up again and again and is called deceptive, I mean, that is such a strong word, called deceptive by some of the most prominent Rupert Sheldrake, Dean Radin, Darrell Bem, all citing this guy for being deceptive. And the Darrell Bem case was so...
So I don't know what you're saying, Alex. Are you just saying that there are some people who are deceptive and stuck in their ideas? Because you're definitely right. Or that there's a mainstream that kind of perpetuates itself because it brings in people that agree with it? Because you're definitely right. But that doesn't seem anything remotely to do with a conspiracy or some sort of manipulation. That just feels like that's the way the world works everywhere.
That's the way the world works, right? And if you were the one in charge of running the world, if you had a vested interest in running the world, and you wanted the world to run a certain way versus not a certain way, which, let's face it, I mean, somebody does have a vested interest, in whether or not certain ideas are promoted and advanced in our culture. That makes a difference. It makes a difference economically. It makes a difference socially in terms of how we control society, where society goes. All these things matter. So it's incredibly naive to think that someone wouldn't be interested in how those things turn out. To think that
so somebody has got a vested interest in denying parapsychology outside of this, who's putting the cheese somewhere to get all of these scientists to run around it and...
absolutely. There's no, and they're really not interested in parapsychology per se. They're interested in the underlying idea that it goes back to this idea of who are you? Why are you here? Well, there's differences in terms of what would be the social implications if we thought we were all the big words that we were saying, if we were this kind of freewheeling ball of consciousness that's evolving on our own and we have these kind of things, or if we're a biological robot in a meaningless universe. I mean, we've talked about this many times, right? Because we've had a couple of interviews together. You think it's accident? I would turn it around on you, Tim. It is a preposterous notion to think that, for anyone to think that they're a biological robot, and that the meaningless is universe. The universe is meaningless, devoid of love, devoid of goodness, devoid of anything. It's a preposterous idea, yet it's been perpetuated in science for a long time. You think that's purely accidental? You think that's just random, the way things happen?
I certainly don't think there's any vested interest, kind of planning the whole thing out and moving.
So it is accidental. So then you are
It's not accidental.
Purely accidental. That's just accidental. That's just how things turned out, man.
No, it's what happens. Like just in the same way that we went through a phase of believing in the Christian myth, and that dominated our culture. That another idea has come up in opposition to that. That has now triumphed. Why? Because it's done very well. It has this reductionist agenda because that makes sense for it. That's how it's functioned. Now new ideas will come in to challenge that. That will move on, and And within it, of course, there's vested interests who want to maintain what they believe, just like there was in the church. But that doesn't, it's a different thing. It's much more organic.
It's different how? It's different how in terms of those vested interests have a reason to want things to turn out one way or another, but they don't exercise that influence? I don't understand.
Well, of course they're of course everyone's doing that, but it's a vastly complex thing.
Right, it's vastly complex. Some people wield more power.
It's society. It's what society is.
Right.
So, so when you look
some
at
people collectively get together.
it's a big jump that there are other than the fact that there is a mainstream view of science which wants to perpetuate itself, like all views, and that they are going, oh, we don't like that because it doesn't fit with our philosophy. We would need a major shift in our philosophy, and that's keeping Rupert out of TED Talks, for instance. And it's a bad thing, and it's not good science, and it's narrow. But that's a different thing to there's a covert agenda behind it, which is about keeping us enslaved or keeping us down.
You've already pushed me on that. I've already told you it's not some organized, carefully controlled kind of thing. It's more of a freewheeling. It is, as you said, there's various interests. There's various that.
Well, what do you mean then when you say it's not by accident?
It is certainly not by accident.
So
We all have interest in the outcome of these policy decisions, the way that culture evolves, the way that we have a vested interest. And the more powerful we are, certainly people that have more money and more influence have more power. And they may associate with other people that are like-minded, or they may associate with people that are.
Well, what you're saying now just seems obvious and uncontentious. I mean, it just feels like, well, of course.
Exactly. And at some point, that power becomes so great that it becomes the kind of things we see politically, where we say politically, wow, politics makes strange bedfellows, we say, because here are people that seem to not have interest but have joined together to promote a certain belief or a certain value. And then to think that that is all transparent and is going on above board, I think is just, it's not only naive, it's counter to what we know. As Richard was saying before, if you take the Gulf of Tonkin incident, to take it back to the 9/11, that's now disclosed. So they denied it in the same way they deny all this other stuff for 50 years. Yeah. And now it's disclosed and it's known. Where I started with on this thing was the ET thing, which I think you've just kind of completely glossed over the fact that it is now disclosed. It is disclosed that it's a reality. But we have to put that back in the context of, Richard Dolan is a really competent UFO researcher, and I certainly don't agree with him on everything, but he wrote a book a few years ago titled AD, After Disclosure. And he said, there never will be disclosure because the questions will never stop. The questions in terms of, well, why was this case known of UFOs flying over nuclear bases and was reported by 10 people on the ground and 2 people in the silos and all the rest? Why wasn't that brought to the American public? Why was this individual, Paul Benowitz, why was he driven crazy just because he came forward? And why was this information, this campaign to literally drive the guy crazy to stop disclosure? The questions would never stop. What happened was actually absolutely the opposite. They disclosed in December of 17, and no one said anything. And that's the real question. I think the reason that people didn't say anything is that people already accept the reality of this. You're on the outside looking in, but most people accept that somehow there is some intelligent force powering these devices, and they have some agenda that we don't totally understand, but we better begin to understand it because it does seem to intersect with these consciousness things that we deal about, that we care about. And the Wilbert Smith memo that was released in 1950 from the United States, from the Canadian government, that said, I've gone to the US, I've talked to the people at the highest level, the alien thing is number 1 on their list, higher than the hydrogen bomb. And there is a mental component to it that they're very interested in. And lo and behold, the next thing you know, they're very interested in MK Ultra. And lo and behold, the next thing they're very interested in is remote viewing. And they're very interested in the mental consciousness element and where that might be and whether that might be weaponized, whether there might be a technological component to it. And why wouldn't they? Because our government, if we accept that we've ceded some power to them, we've given them the power to protect us. And if something is a potential threat, we do hope that they go out and do it. So they've done all these dirty, nasty things in trying to understand ET consciousness, and they're not revealing it. And then when they do reveal it, no one cares. And these are if you investigate it, these are the facts as near as we can tell them. So if you go and talk to Dr. David Jacobs, and who's researched more than anyone else the abduction thing, and Mary Rodwell in Australia, who I've interviewed as well, and they both have these different ideas about the spiritual nature of it, but they both say, hey, there is a program involved. It is something that is happening that has a goal, has an intent, has a purpose, kind of thing.
Well, they have completely opposing ideas on the spiritual nature of it. They're not a little bit. They're but
there is something going on. I mean, we just are not engaging with this most, as Richard said, this like number two thing. Who are we? Why are we here? Number one.
I think what Richard actually said was that what I heard was in terms of difficulty to answer the question.
So what would you make of that, Alex? Here's, just some thoughts I have. If we're going to go back to the UFO thing, okay, there's no explanation that works for me. Okay, so are they spiritual or are they malevolent in some way? Okay, so a lot of people have traumatic experiences, being abducted. Then some people have spiritual experiences. Some people have traumatic experiences they later reinterpret as spiritual. The people that take the malevolent view say, well, that's Stockholm syndrome. Okay, are they coming from other worlds? Well, if they're coming from other worlds, our sun is not especially young as the suns in this galaxy go. So they could have been coming here since the time of the dinosaurs. So why have they suddenly taken an interest in anally probing humans? In this kind of narrative we have about abduction, it seems to fit in with our science fiction fantasies more than it does with what aliens would actually do. If they're really concerned about the environment, which they suggest they are to certain abductees, contactees, well, that would seem to be a strange way to go about it, to start picking random people off the streets and telling them, you've got to take care of the environment. So are they interdimensional? Is this an outgrowth of the US government program? When you talk about disclosure, okay, the other stream on that is, of course, there's always been the conspiracy theory that wouldn't it be great if governments could create the biggest external threat of them all, the biggest red scare of them all, the biggest terrorism of them all would be a threat from a UFO invasion. Now, that doesn't sound very credible, but we're talking about UFOs here, so suddenly anything's on the table, right? So I'm asking you've like vastly more experience than me, and going into the details of this with so many different people. Do you have any sense of making any sense of the experience of zooming in and nailing down what's going on?
I heard an interview the other day with Whitley Strieber, who of course wrote the book Communion and became probably the most public guy to come out and say, I've experienced this alien encounter, if you don't want to say abduction kind of thing. And then he wrote a book with a guy we all like, Dr. Jeff Kripal, and they wrote a book on the supernatural and all this stuff. But I'm bearing the lead. Much, much stranger and weirder than we could possibly imagine. What if that's the answer to all those questions? And what if we've built up these barriers that don't allow us to penetrate any of that because we keep not wanting to deal with the ultimate strangeness of what that is? And what I'm really hammering, you're very good-natured about this, Tim. I think it makes for a good dialogue, a dialogue that people need to have and need to hear both sides of. Is I'm saying, in the way that you so bravely penetrate all this stuff, this needs to be penetrated fully in an intellectual thing. And the only way to get inside is to penetrate the outside bubble of, don't be a conspiracy nut. Yeah, be a frickin' conspiracy nut from the beginning, because anything that involves power or money involves conspiracy. I was in the business world for the longest time. Are you fucking kidding me? Everything's a fucking conspiracy. Everything, as soon as you get above the assistant manager level at McDonald's, it's all conspiracy. terms of where you buy your buns and how much ketchup you use and whether you're going to get that corner there that needs to be rezoned by the city, but that's going to take a little envelope under his desk in order to get it done. Man, that's just how the world works. So when I hear people object to the basic idea of conspiracy, I'm like, man, God bless you. What world have you lived in? Because it's not my world.
Well, but people do, Alex, right? And I had this conversation in the YouTube comment section the other week, actually, about when people do and don't see conspiracy, okay? And it was a comment on, I think it was a video you made on Donald Trump, Tim, okay? And the guy, I don't know who I was talking to, it was some internet person, but he cited you and Gordon White as being two people in the kind of spiritual psi research world, if you like, who are more embracing of things like conspiracy or have a cynicism towards global warming, okay? And we had a discussion about why people do and don't see things, right? And people who have had those kind of experiences of being in business, of seeing corruption, and come away with this sense of, okay, that's how the world works. Whereas I think in spiritual circles, you meet different types of people. You meet a lot of very nice people who have never had experiences like that and find it hard to conceptualize the kind of darkness that could exist behind the scenes in a government and the kind of cynicism that could play out there and the willingness to murder for profit, okay? Or by contrast, you have people like I attribute my own conspiratorial looking to the interest in Advaita Vedanta, because essentially Advaita is turning one's awareness around and looking as deep as one can look within, and then not being satisfied of that and keeping on going and going and going until you think you've found something, or you feel, you know, you've found something absolutely solid and foundational, okay? So if you turn that looking around then, and you can put it out into the world and ask, okay, well, what really happened on 9/11, or what really is the deep state? And you don't find answers to that, okay? You just find this rabbit hole that keeps on going. But you can find more solidity in knowing what it isn't and kind of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, just to be absolutely clear, I don't want anyone who's watching this or either of you to think that I don't think that people conspire. I certainly do. And I think it happens all the time. I think sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's just a function of people with similar agendas. And sometimes I think it can be malicious. I mean, when I was younger and very involved in politics, I witnessed, you know, what happened in Chile. I witnessed what happened in Nicaragua. You know, I know that's obvious. That's a large part of history. And as you pointed out, actually really articulately, Richard, you know, you can just go back through history and see it again and again and again and again. And people do shore up their self-interest for definitely. And there's a tendency to promote in a skewed way what you agree with and leave out what you don't agree with. And that's massive. And I have no disagreement with any of that. I think it's, for me, it's wanting to be careful that we can not see, and maybe I've misunderstood some of the things you're saying, Alex, because of this. Because the thing which I want to avoid is assuming there is some nefarious hand behind everything, and that we end up with this plethora of things which that every single idea which gets called a conspiracy theory is a separate idea. They're not all the same idea. And maybe, some of them are true.
Maybe that's a good way to round this up, because we've been at it for a long time. And
we have.
Maybe the thing is what I'd suggest is that we return to the very beginning of what we were talking about, and that maybe the solution is the fluidity that Richard was talking about, because that's what I'd advocate. But I find that so many people in your camp, if I can say such a thing, Tim, are not willing to jump back and forth. So it's like, hey, why not take a complete conspiratorial view? So this is tantamount to the materialist versus the idealist. So I'm going to be completely conspiratorial. I'm going to say everything's a frickin' conspiracy until you prove otherwise. And that can be my materialist point of view. And then I can switch over and say, nothing is a conspiracy unless it's proven to the nth degree. And that's going to be my idealist view. And maybe the real magic in this is to be able to move back and forth. But what does kind of piss me off is this idea that, oh no, to start with everything from a conspiratorial point of view, oh, that would just be wrong. Why would we want to do that? Well, the reason we want to do that is because that's what the world has told us. So I'm okay with moving back and forth and saying, I need to fluidly move between both, but I'm not okay with saying one of those is somehow superior to the other, because starting conspiratorially first before it's disproven makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, I think you are okay with saying one is superior to the other, right? I know I would be, and I totally agree. That was how I got back into the conspiratorial research, was to look at it that way and say, okay, the world is an unknown event. There are different ways we can explain it, different lenses we can look through. No one lens shows us everything. Now, it might be that one day one does. It might be that actually we find the lens that says it's all been the Illuminati from ancient Babylon. That's the right one, but we don't know that yet. So the best way is to look at it through different lenses and say, okay, yeah, through one lens, you can say it's a conspiracy, or through another, it all looks very accidental. Or another one might be it's structural, okay, like the state is set up in a different way, like in 1786 or whatever in America, and that led to inevitable outcomes because of just the structure of the thing. And all of those lenses shed a light. And where I think you and Tim perhaps talk past each other, and I might be a bit closer to your worldview, Alex, so I maybe talk past him on this issue too. I mean, talking past, because we're in different paradigms. On an issue like global warming, where I do think it's relevant, the paradigm is you need a certain depth of conspiracy to believe that global warming as a conspiracy could emerge out of that. You need a certain depth of deep state. That rabbit hole needs to go a certain way. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So whether it's right or wrong, or whether you stay there or not, you need to be able to shift into seeing, oh, okay, this is why people would think this, because they think that, like, let's take the Rockefellers and their foundation. It's like been very prominent in US history in health and education, and also had the clout to influence the formation of the IPCC, of the UN, etc. And that's where global warming comes from, because it's an effort to control global energy supplies, right? Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that's the conspiratorial paradigm, which I would say I think also has a place at the table when we're having the discussion, alongside but global warming is a real threat, and so on and so forth.
Tim, final words?
Wow. When you invited me to take part in this discussion and you listed all the things you wanted to talk about, I said to Richard, wow, that's never going to happen. But it has. You've taken us on that journey. It's been a while. I wonder what people will make of being part of it and listening to it. It's been wonderful. It's been fascinating. I certainly don't want to give the impression that I think these views are ill-informed or just unintelligent. I don't. But I do. What I think the truth is probably what Richard said earlier, which is on every side of an argument like this or a discussion like this, there are people who are well-informed and thought things through and have reached the conclusion for a reason, and then there's people who haven't. And inevitably, if you are in one side, it's very easy to see the other people on the other side who are the people that haven't. So there is a lot of people, I think, in the conspiracy world who seem uninformed to the point of being unhinged. But I'm sure that's true on the other side and every side, because there's just a lot of people in humanity who are ill-informed to the point of being unhinged. And we shouldn't let that blind to us, that there can be serious points to be made. And I think Richard has functioned very well in bringing that through. And as somebody who thinks paralogically, I think it's absolutely imperative to be able to see it from these different points of view. And the place I tend to end up is usually it's a bit of all of it.
Well, I didn't mean for it to take this long and to chew up such a big part of your evening, but I'm glad it did. It was an awesome conversation, and it's just great to connect with you guys. Again, our guests have been Tim Freke and Richard Cox. Check out Tim Freke's website for his excellent books, and if you do have a chance to see him in person, to attend one of his events, which we never got around to speaking about, but he's become even more active, kind of re-upping his game in terms of getting out there. So if he comes to your neighborhood, check it out. Great. And he is coming to the US, right, Tim? You're
I
coming.
am. I'm coming to New York to give a talk on evolution and spirituality. My new book, Our Soul Story, on the 9th of October. And then I'm running a retreat at the Omega Institute. So maybe to take it back to that warm feeling we started with, rather than the rather dark feeling of us being manipulated, there is, without doubt, and I know you agree with this, Alex, there is a place where you can go deep inside, and there is this deep knowing, and there's this enormous love. And my day job, when I'm not having discussions with you, is to take people to that direct experience. And that's what I'm going to be doing, that gnosis, at the Deep Awakening Retreat, which is at the Omega Institute, at the 12th to the 14th of October. And that is a way of coming out of all of this into something very, very, very deep indeed.
I think that's really a profound and important point that I was saving to the end, and I didn't kind of get there. And that's that, you're coming at this from a different angle, but ultimately what you just said is my ultimate bottom line too. And that's the way I put it, is the way Mickey Singer, who wrote the book, The Untethered Soul, puts it, is that the secret of the ascent is to always look up. So the secret to the ascent is to find that love head, that God head, and that's the problem I see is with the conspiracy world. Not the problem that you said, not that people are unhinged or that they're over involved or any of that, is that they don't see a way out. And that's because the way out is a spiritual path that completely bypasses all this nonsense. And if people want to play these games, people have been playing these games since the beginning. And your book, Jesus Mysteries, is really about what I think, how governmental powers at the time, the Roman Empire, saw an opportunity to kind of, it's complicated, but one element of it at some point had to be some control, improved ability to do it. So this has been going on for a long time. The secret of the ascent is to always look up. And that's what I find in your work. And that's what I think you're really all about. And that's why we connect and resonate, because none of this other stuff really matters all that much.
Yeah, beautifully put. I love that.
Well, we just spent 3 hours talking about stuff that doesn't matter, I guess. Richard, any closing comments? I do want people to check out the Deep State Consciousness podcast, because you're doing an awesome job there, my man. I commend your work. And
people are waiting for the next Skeptico episode to come out. I'd be delighted if they did. I might just plug also, people might be interested in, I've been working on a study recently looking at spirituality in relation to principally body image dissatisfaction. Okay, so taking a transpersonal approach to that, where I've drawn in things like the practicalities of idealism and near-death experience and Advaita Vedanta and such things. And by the time this comes out, that should be published. It might be an interesting thing for people to read. And I also run a monthly group, particularly relevant to Skeptico, looking at death and bereavement from the kind of NDE, after-death communication perspective, as a way of practically engaging with that and looking as to what it is as a practical kind of thing from the whole continuing bonds paradigm. And anyone can come along to that. It's just something I do for, for the benefits of it. So I think they're the things I'd like to mention. And closing comments. Yeah, it's been a great discussion, on a whole, and I'd just be interested in what people's responses are to it, really. So yeah, thanks very much, Alex and Tim.
Yeah, it's been great to hang out with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
So thanks for watching this video.
We'll keep at
It
it.
wasn't really a video, but just an audio.
Bye, everybody.
Stored as a video. I apologize. But there's more videos out there as well. But please check out the Skeptico website. You can see it here. We cover a lot of different stuff you might be interested in relating to controversial science and spirituality. A lot of shows up there, over 350 of them or so, all free, all available for download. So do check it out.